What else was found in the World Trade Center dust? Well, let's look at chemistry professor Niels Harrit, 40-year associate, the Nanoscience Center, 60 peer-reviewed papers, author, active thermitic materials observed in the dust from the World Trade Center catastrophe. Dr. Harrit.
You hear me? Okay. What you see here in the first picture, thank you for having me on here. It's a great honor actually to present this to you. The first picture, I hope I cannot hear myself, but nevertheless, this is Professor Jones, Stephen E. Jones from Brigham Young University, with a plastic bag of the World Trade Center dust, across which he is pulling a magnet, and along with the magnet comes some stuff, and actually pretty much of it, and within that you will find the ion spheres, which Richard Gage has just introduced for you, and some small, what we call red-gray chips, which Professor Jones published or told about for the first time on December the 15th, 2007 in Boston. And what you see here is actually, this is going a bit too fast. What you saw in the previous picture was the biggest of these chips. As far as I know, it's 2 millimeter long, and it's red on one side and it's gray on the other side. And it's the red side which is interesting. Now, in the spring of 2008, I was invited on board a little team of scientists to investigate the red-gray chips, which eventually resulted in a publication which came on April 3rd, 2009, after a total of 18 months work. And this is the scientific publications with documents and characterizes these red-gray chips. It's very long, and I'm not going to pull you through all the data in that communication presentation in that paper. The most important discovery that we made was that these chips were still reactive. And if we proceed to the next slide, please. Well, maybe first I should add that the paper, the investigation, was based on 4 samples, which all were collected within a week on the southern Manhattan, on the locations you see on this map. And the chain of custody of these 4 samples is very thorough. And I later realized that that was actually important, the chain of custody. And if you proceed to the next slide, please. It should be a demonstration, if we may proceed to the next slide, please. Yes, these are examples of the red-gray chips from these 4 samples. And what you should notice here is the dimensions. 1 millimeter on the upper left is a big one, and the 3 others are about 1/10 of a millimeter. So the big ones may be detectable by the naked eye, but otherwise you will need a microscope in order to locate these small chips. They're very small. This is an electron microscope picture of one of the chips. And again, you will notice the thickness of these chips is about 1/10 of a millimeter. So everything you do with these chips are done under an optical microscope. Next slide, please. Yes. What you see here is a technology called energy dispersive spectroscopy. It is done within the electron microscope, and there you can see the elemental composition of these chips. And I can barely see the left part of this picture, but I know that what you see here is that the red face of the chips contains iron, silicon, and aluminum, and oxygen, and carbon. Actually, the carbon peak is not very trustworthy with this technology. But this shows that the chips contains iron, silicon, aluminum, and there's a little potassium and calcium on the 3rd chip. Now, this experiment illustrates actually that at least some of the aluminum and the silicon are present as in individual particles, because this chip has been soaked in a solvent called methyl ethyl ketone, which makes the chip to swell. And so in the lower, you can actually see decoupling of the silicon and the aluminum signals. What you see here, in the middle left, you see the aluminum, and in the lower left, you see the silicon, and they are not overlapping. And on the right part of this picture, you see an energy dispersion spectroscopy from the silicon-rich area, which shows exclusively it contains silicon, and the lower one shows that the aluminum-rich area almost exclusively contains aluminum. So this means that the silicon and the aluminum is present in individual particles, I would say, individual, and this is an indirect indication that we have aluminum present in the elemental state. Now to the next picture, and this is the most important part of it, because it should be an illustration that these red-gray chips are still reactive. This is a video, and you'll notice that there is a yellow particle actually hitting the hand of the experimentalist. He's carrying a micro torch in his right hand, and one of these less than 1 millimeter red-gray chips is being ignited and is hitting his hand. He could actually feel that something was hitting his hand in this experiment. He couldn't localize the particle afterwards. Now in the next slide, you see what we do to these red-gray chips. We put them into an instrument called a differential scanning calorimeter, where you are measuring the heat development during a chemical reaction. I cannot see the lower part of this slide, but I know that what you do, you heat up the chip at 100 degrees, 200 degrees, 300 degrees, and then at 430 degrees, the signal simply goes off screen, indicating that there is a chemical reaction going on, quite violent chemical reaction going on. And then we take the instrument apart in the next slide, please. And all the samples you see, oh, that was a bit too far, I think. Wasn't it? There should be, no.
That's the next one.
Okay, then you may proceed to the next slide. I think we have them mixed up here. No, and the next one, then we have to back up. This, here, okay, here, let's take it here. What you see in the left part of this picture are all burned chips which had been taken out from the calorimeter. And so these are chips which has been heated up and reacted. And what you see, what you recognize here are metallic spheres. And you also see some translucent spheres that is silicate or glass, if you wish. But it's very important here that you can see with your own eyes that the thermal reaction of these red-gray chips form the iron spheres. And if we can back up now 2 slides, please, Richard. So the next is one, yes, because the upper one is one chip which has been taken out of this differential scanning calorimeter instrument, and we do the energy dispersion spectroscopy, and it illustrates, and this is the key experiment, because what you see is that when the red-gray chips are reacting, we are forming iron spheres, and so this is the proof that this material is thermitic. The lower part of this picture is a metal sphere from a World Trade Center dust, and we should not go into detail with this, but it is the fingerprint that the material being formed by reacting the red-gray chips in the laboratory is the same material is being found in abundance by the RGLE group in the World Trade Center dust. And then we should proceed to the next. Yeah, that is a wonderful, lucky find. And we were very happy when we discovered this chip because it's a half-burned chip. You'll see here that the chip is half-burned, but the iron sphere is still sticking to the chip. So there's no doubt where it's coming from. And this is for everyone to see. Yeah, this we don't need actually because it's repetition of the previous chip. So please stay here. because what you see on the right hand of the picture is our homemade, we call this nanothermite. And you may recognize that this is not the same kind of thermite which has been so wonderfully demonstrated by you in the experiments by Jonathan Cole. This is something you just mix together, a mixture of pulverized aluminum and iron oxide, or rust if you proceed. This is a material which is produced by nanotechnology. And we know that investigation or research into these kind of energetic materials were initiated in the early 1990s, in particular spearheaded by the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory and also by the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico. And we know that this research has been going on military laboratories in the big power in England, in the United Kingdom and France as well. And so but these, my colleagues at the military laboratories, they also have to brag once in a while. They are applying for funding and they are speaking at conferences, conference proceedings, etc. So the technology per se, we do understand. And so, but we cannot prepare in duplicate exactly the same material as we have found in the World Trade Center dust. But what you see on your right is my colleague Kevin Ryan, one of the co-authors of this publications I showed you before, who has prepared nanothermite according to a recipe from the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. He's a chemist as well as I. And if we go back to the picture, this is my last comment on this, is that what you will recognize in our homemade nanothermite, it is the next picture. The next picture, please. One more further. The previous one, that's it. What you see here on your right side of this is our homemade nanothermite. It is not exactly the same stuff as we found in the World Trade Center dust, but the key observation is the occurrence of the iron spheres. You can see the metallic spheres being formed in our homemade nanothermite, and it is easily comparable and recognizable also on your left side of this picture, which are the World Trade Center dust samples. So this proves that this kind of material were also applied in the destruction of the World Trade Center centers, along, I must stress this, with thermate, which is indicated by the sulfidation of the steel beams. Our material cannot account for that. And as everyone can see from the beautiful video work of David Chandler, is that explosives were used as well.
Thank you very much, Niels Harrit from Copenhagen.
You're welcome.
And so the question for the panelists then is the hypothesis of explosive demolition corroborated? Do we have the 10 key characteristics of explosive destruction or destruction by incendiaries and atypical characteristics in the case of the Twin Towers? Can fire create any of these characteristic features? Can they create all of them? Certainly not. With additional circumstantial and corroborating evidence, we believe at AE 9/11 Truth that this is proof of controlled demolition beyond a reasonable doubt.
I would like to know if the investigation by Niels Harrit and Stephen Jones, Professor Harrit, itself looked for explosives in addition to thermite or nanothermite. Did they actually look for RDX? Did they look for C4?
We understand that RDX and C4 and high energy explosives do not have a residue that would survive years after the event.
So they wouldn't have.
That testing would be inconclusive.
Inconclusive. So, but they didn't look. They didn't look for it.
I don't know if they looked or not.
Richard, do we still have samples of the World Trade Center dust? And if we do, has it been documented where it's come from and where it is presently? In other words, is there a chain of evidence that's been set up?
Dr. Harrit, can you address the question of the chain of evidence?
Yes, chain of custody, yes. Our investigation was based actually on, as I mentioned, on 4 samples, which had a very good chain of custody. And I must admit that we have used what we have of the good stuff. I'm not aware of any samples. I may be corrected on this by others, but personally I'm not aware of samples still left with a good chain of custody. I know where some stuff is which has not a good chain of custody, but new investigation must probably get its stuff from NIST or the Secretary of Homeland Security. They must have tons of it. If I may add one thing actually to the forensic aspects of this, which I guess you would be interested in, it is that I do not consider our investigation as a stand-alone piece of forensic evidence. It must be seen in the context for the specific reason that this has not been duplicated by other investigators. In the beginning, we were very hopeful that somebody else would pick up this and duplicate our work, but it hasn't happened. And the reason for this, I believe, now I have learned over the years that 9/11 is a no-go for our academic institutions. They have been very thoroughly gagged in the aftermath of 9/11. So this, you may also turn it the other way around and say that our result has not been challenged by any academic research, which in itself is a validation of, if you wish, our results. But it must be seen in the context. I think it's very strong. We do not have time for doing this. David Chandler actually hinted at it, but I personally have a very good collapse model, or of the Twin Towers at least, into which our nanothermite fits very nicely as the origin of this completely homogeneous white smoke trails, as billions of people have seen so countless number of times, which are tracking all the girders and steel beams being thrown out of the Twin Towers. This is not concrete, this is not wallboard, this is an ongoing chemical reaction, and it is white. And as David Chandler pointed out, the second product of the thermite reaction, aluminum oxide, is white. So this is my personal belief of the model, collapse model of the World Trade Center collapses. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Veal has a question.
Professor Harrit, Dr. Thomas Eagar of MIT has read your paper and said that the substance that you have found is paint. Is there something that you can show us here which demonstrates that that's not true?
Well, I suggest that Thomas Eagar publish his work in a scientific publication, and eventually we may address it according to the ordinary procedures of academia. But
I appreciate that we would like that to happen, yeah, but I'm just wondering if you can point to something or show us a slide, for example.
Well, actually, what I have demonstrated is that this material is thermitic. So what Professor Eagar actually is endorsing is thermitic paint, and I don't think that would pass the fire tests which were performed on the elements of the steel construction prior to when it was used in the late 60s. If you get my point, what we have found is reacting, and all the elements of this steel frame building is going through very severe fire tests. And so if this should be paint, it will never go through these tests. Am I expressing myself clearly on this? And beyond that, it is not behaving like paint, and we can see in the laboratory experiments. But that would go too much into detail. I think the argument about the fireproofing tests is valid in this connection.
Mustafa Danusa has a question.
This question is also for Niels Harrit. Is there an explanation, like I guess like a natural explanation for why thermate would be at the World Trade Center location, other than, let's say, somebody else putting it there? Maybe the different materials or chemicals that were used in the construction of the building, once there was an explosion, that those might have kind of concentrated themselves in such a way to create thermate. Is there some other explanation that can be given for why thermate would exist at the World Trade Center compounds?
No. But let me just, as a footnote, thermate is the stuff with sulfur in. And this is what is accounting for the sulfidation of the steel beams. The nanothermite does not contain sulfur. Our findings cannot account for the sulfidation of the steel. But nevertheless, maybe we should return to the findings of the RJLE group, and they found 5.87% of the iron spheres in the World Trade Center dust. And this is the reactive thermite. And the background level, what is usually found of iron spheres in ordinary building dust, is 0.04%. That is, it's roughly 135 times more iron spheres in the World Trade Center dust than in ordinary building dust. So there is no way that any natural, there's no, let us say, legitimate source of the iron spheres or the red grade chips.
Is there any way to identify the unique particular composition of any particular thermite or thermate? Like in the Karen Silkwood case, we were able to show that the radioactive plutonium that was placed in the refrigerator in Karen Silkwood's home came from lot number 29. And it was never in the plant when she was there. And that the only sample they had was under lock and key of the Kerr-McGee Security Company. And they fought us off for weeks on being able to get at that sample.
Short question.
So is there a way to prove the source of thermite? Is there is there military thermite? Is there, what examination has there been of that?
Well, that would require cooperation with NIST and the military laboratories of the United States.
So we might need a subpoena.
In my opinion.
If I could jump in on that one.
Are there different types of
interesting, yes.
I just wanted to jump in on that, is that it's not available on the open market. It's only used by the military, and the military industrial complex is who manufactures it.
That's what I wanted to know, is that this is really available for military purposes, and we can figure out where it's produced and who has it?
The story is much longer than this, actually, because by the emergence of nanotechnology, it opened the possibility for exploring the thermite reaction, not only for explosives, but also for propellants. And so given the time, I could supply you with the sources, the information of this, that you can tune this. The thermite reaction has a lot of energy, but the old-fashioned thermite is slow. The point in explosives is not that they are particularly energetic. The point is they are fast. So by the emergence of nanotechnology, you could benefit from the energy content of the nanothermite reaction and use it for explosives and propellants, what you may call rocket fuel. That is, you can tune the whole range from incendiaries to explosives by using, it is called sol-gel technology. And this we understand there is a whole range of different kind of energetic materials based on the thermite reaction. And it can be varied in many ways. It's a huge research area. And the red grade chips is only one. So, well, regarding the relationship between the military laboratories and all the academic institutions in the United States today, I would like to refer you to a paper by Kevin Ryan, one of the co-authors of the paper I'm talking about today. Kevin Ryan has taken a look into the individuals which has been working in Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory and in NIST, and it turns out
We're just getting to the good part.
The paper he's talking about is called The Top 10 Connections Between NIST and Nanothermite, and you can find it in the Journal of 9/11 Studies.
So maybe we'll get back to Niels, but let's have Dave Meiswinkle ask our last question. We'll hopefully take a lunch break.